right. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today and coming to my talk. Really want to say a special shout out to everybody at Way West Hackin Fest. I wish I could be there in person today. Unfortunately, we're doing our grand opening of our new Trusted Tech headquarters and are flying everybody in from all over the world and country and everything to come see it. If you're ever in Cleveland, Ohio, feel free to stop by. It'll be in Fairlawn, Ohio, and we have nap rooms if you just want to come by and take a nap. But really wish I could be there in person today to talk to everybody and to mingle and to see everybody. It's been way too long going to conferences and everything else. But you can definitely find me out at Deadwood for Wild West Hacking Fest. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I will be out there coming up here shortly, and then definitely want to make it to Way West Hacking Fest next year. But I hope everybody's having a great time. And a special shout out to everybody that makes Way West Hacking Fest possible. Seriously, such an awesome conference, both Way West and Wild West Hacking Fest. Wish I could be there again in person and miss all of you as we go along. But today's talk is really talking about what happened with the narrative around Russia and Ukraine and cyber warfare and mass destruction. And, we've heard about this a lot, but I wanted to give a perspective of my background, is in the military intelligence side of the house. I came from the United States Marine Corps in the signals intelligence side in the cyber warfare space. I was an intelligence analyst. I, did a lot of work in cyber warfare in my early career, and things have changed quite a bit since then. But a lot of things have stayed the same. And I think when you hear what's happening on the news, as soon as there's any type of aggression, especially from a nation state power that has cyber warfare capabilities, all the experts go on the news. I was on the news, obviously, talking about like, hey, when's the next cyber war going to happen? When are we going to see this, mass sophistication of hacking that was going on? So this talk is going to be more so about breaking down the different intelligence agencies that Russia has its capabilities, but also what we should be prepared for and how we should start to structure and look at things in a different light so that we can get better with defense. And nothing I'm going to say here at the very end around how do you bolster your security is going to be unique or revolutionary to where we're going to completely go in a different direction with cybersecurity. I think we all have a good understanding around what happens. It just takes time to get our security programs to these specific areas. You have a lack of shortage in talent, which I definitely want to talk about here in a little bit. But I really want to get down to why we didn't see such a massive campaign around cyber warfare. We saw some incursions activity, against governmental websites, but at large, we didn't really see a massive amount of campaigns come from Russia. So why is that? What happened? Why was everybody wrong talking about that? And why is it so difficult to conduct cyber warfare during an actual military kinetic extension conflict that we see obviously going on? I also want to say my hearts go out to all the folks in Ukraine with everything that's going on out there. Some amazing and brave individuals. Everything from President Zelensky all the way down to all the troops that are out there. Such a devastating and horrible situation. Again, my thoughts and prayers out to everybody out there, and I really hope the Ukrainian people continue to get relief and support, and can hopefully come out of this in a positive light. No war is positive in any way, shape, or form, but definitely to the Ukrainian people, I really hope things get better over there, and hopefully in the short term. My name is Dave Kennedy. I've been in the cybersecurity space for I think 25 plus years. I've been getting into obviously the fitness thing. So COVID for me, obviously terrible situation. But I got really big into lifting and getting into resistance training and health and nutrition and everything else that's along there. So I've gone through, big Dave where I was, 315 pounds and very much overweight, to little Dave where, you could barely recognize that I even existed at all the way back to big Dave again in a different way. So I've been enjoying this whole health and fitness thing. If you're interested, I have, that's my trainer there, Ben on the right, have a podcast called Hacking Your Health Podcast, where we talk about health and nutrition, business, how I balance cybersecurity, running two companies, and being, billable all the way to, how do I fit in fitness and things like that all together. So it's kind of a fun podcast. We do it every week, just talking about various things that are going on in our lives, things that you can do to incorporate into your own lives and make a kick towards the healthy side of the house. And, obviously, we sit all day long, pretty sedentary, and I'm on a standing desk right now. But we sit a lot throughout the days. And this is just a way to kind of look at that and say, hey, what can I do in my day-to-day life to make some small changes that have big impacts down the road? But, author of the Social Engineer Toolkit, Magic Unicorn, co-author of the book Metasploit the Penetration Tester's Guide, helped out with the TV show Mr. Robot, testified in front of Congress on numerous occasions. I'm the CEO and founder of Trusted Sec and the founder and CTO over at Binary Defense. Always happy to help folks out. If you ever have any questions, very approachable. Again, wish I was there in person to say hi to everybody, meet new folks, but hopefully, again, get to do that again down the road here very soon. I also am a huge fan of Back to the Future. This is my DeLorean that I've converted to the Back to the Future machine over the years. It's actually in the shop right now. Again, I feel like every time either Way West or Wild West is going on, it's in the shop. But DeLoreans are notorious for not being the most amazing and reliable cars. They have like a PRV 6 in there. The undercarriage is the worst part, heavily rusted out. So basically, when they were manufacturing them, before they got all the coating put on the undercarriage, it sat outside in the rain and basically rusted as they put the coating on. So the undercarriage is actually getting rebuilt, doing a lot of work to the car to get it to where it needs to be. So it's a project, a lot of fun, but I'm a huge fan, and driving around in the Back to the Future machine is basically a dream come true. I also want to give a special shout out to John Strand for putting this on. It's obviously not John Strand, but he looks very similar, I think, from a body build perspective. I know John is really into the fitness stuff as well, so congratulations, John, on all the success there. And it's actually at johnstrand.com, and it has a bunch of modeling pictures of this guy, so just wanted to throw that out there. There was one that I actually had that I was like, I had like a big censored mark over it. I'm like, man, I don't know if I should put this in here, so I kind of took it out, but I'm definitely going to send that picture to John, through text messages later on after this presentation. To go through it. But again, special shout out to John for putting this on, and his whole team, Velda and Jason and everybody else there. Thank you so much for what you do, for putting these types of events on and getting such an amazing community to come together, share their experiences. And that's ultimately what this industry is about, is learning from one another, sharing our perspectives, and hopefully building upon that to make things, making the world a safer place when it comes to IT security, business, technology, everything else that we do, essentially our day-to-day lives, right? All right, with that, let's kick off to the actual discussion. And why I wanted to do this and not do a talk about, living off the land or the latest exploit out there. I'm not saying those aren't cool topics. Is I think, a lot of folks were expecting this massive campaign from Russia, because this was really one of the first times we've seen one of the top 3 or top 4 players in the cyber warfare space come into a military conflict where cyber warfare was definitely on the table. You had Ukraine, which has both defensive capabilities from an intelligence perspective, a lot of sharing with Western allies from an intelligence gathering perspective. They've also been hacked numerous times. You had the 2015, 2016 outages. You had NotPetya. You had all of these cyber attacks that have happened over the span of several years that have caused Ukraine to heighten their defenses, which we fully expected Russia to go on the offense against that, to try to shut down a lot of their communications. Their ability for command and control, their ability to conduct warfare, defensive capabilities, military command and control. So all of those things are things that we expected to happen when this campaign kicked off. What we saw was very different. We saw some attacks from a cyber perspective. We saw some wiper malware. We saw some disinformation campaigns. We saw some government websites from a Ukraine perspective go down. But we didn't see this massive barrage of attacks that we were expecting, this massive sophistication that you traditionally think of when you think of a player like Russia or a player like China or the United States. When you think of these types of campaigns, you think of SolarWinds, you think of a lot of issues with exchange with Hafnium with China. You look at the shadow brokers and what happened with the Equation Group and all this secret scroll stuff and massive zero-day caches and all of these weaponization and toolings that you'd expect these groups to have over a period of time. And what we saw here was vastly different. And I think what, we get in our heads is a lot of the Mr. Robots, or, we look at a lot of movies. And, if you're in the field and you're a penetration tester or you're a red teamer, this stuff gets hard, right? You go into organizations that have a high level of sophistication. It takes time and effort. It takes a lot of beating your head against the wall. And obviously, from a capabilities perspective, Russia has a lot of money. They have a lot of staffing. They have a lot of research and development. They have R&D facilities, for weaponization and tooling and research and everything else that goes along with that. So they have the capabilities to do, amazing destruction when it comes to cyber warfare capabilities. And when we get down into the different groups, we'll see how they're kind of broken out and how they kind of operate. But for me, why I wanted to do this talk was, I think our expectations of cyber warfare need to be level set a bit. Because cyber warfare isn't one of those things that takes a day, takes 2 days, takes 3 days or 4 days. Usually targeted efforts, attacking organizations, attacking critical infrastructure, which critical infrastructure has always been fascinating to me. Everybody thinks of the critical infrastructure as, there's going to be this mass attack on the grid. It's kind of like the cloud. The cloud is a lot of systems, complex systems, different organizations, different companies, different, configurations, different code. Complexities introduce time and effort that are required for hackers to break in. And it's the same thing for the grid. I put in that in quotation marks. 85% of our critical infrastructure is private sector owned, meaning businesses own our critical infrastructure. And what's important to note about that is that, taking down the grid probably isn't possible, or if it's everything's possible, but very unlikely due to the different systems, different organizations and infrastructure. Could we see a city outage? Sure. Could we see all the cities go down? No. Financial institutions. Could we see the entire financial institution crumble? No. But could they get access to Swift infrastructure, Swift networks, and through a compromised bank, and then from there cause havoc and mayhem potentially? So there's all of these likelihoods that are out there, but the probability of this mass cyber attack that we think of, is something that is kind of fictitious or in the movies. And that's why I want to level set this and say that cyber warfare is very different from what you think of in the movies. When you think of cyber warfare, you think of coordinated attacks against, their ability to do drop bombs, or to, use drones, or to jam, signals from a signals intelligence perspective. You look at all of the different capabilities. And in our military side, we have a number of different groups. We have signals intelligence, we have ELINT, electronic intelligence, looking at, missile defense systems and what they have from a defensive perspective and offensive perspective. Where are their missiles located? What are troop movements looking like? We have, SATCOM that's looking at everything from a satellite communications perspective. We have human intelligence, people on the ground or, behind the lines. All of these things make up all of our capabilities that we have out there to make informed decisions of how we want to conduct warfare. Same thing for other, countries that specifically operate here. Cyber is very different, though, in the fact that it's not like we can say, okay, well, there's, missile silos here that we need to bomb, or there's command and control here from a signals intelligence perspective we need to bomb to knock out communications. We need to do exploratory efforts. We have to break into systems. We have to learn those systems. We have to learn the network infrastructure. Very similarly to what we do from a day in, day out perspective, from a penetration testing perspective or a red team perspective. If you've ever gotten a penetration test report, you're basically looking at a targeted attack against your organization, trying to find exposures or weaknesses and to get access to sensitive information or data, whether that's intellectual property, whether that's, your infrastructure and how it operates, whether it's ransomware trying to come in and shut you down. Very similar objectives, but the same type of methodologies that any of these types of activities from a cyber warfare perspective would still need to be conducted with. And we'll go into some of this because I think it's important to understand that these things that we see when we hear the word cyber warfare, we think, all of these massive offensives being launched in conjunction with military troop movements and everything else. It's not like that. It's very, very different. And so we didn't see this whole red alert thing out there happen, this critical, alert. And I remember when we started doing the sanctions against Russia quite a bit in the United States here, and then all the EU folks followed on that one. Everybody was saying imminent cyber warfare attack against Russia. It was all in the headlines, all the news came out. And what's interesting was I actually turned down, I should rephrase, most of the news organizations turned me down from going onto the networks because I wasn't peddling that same type of narrative. I didn't see an imminent attack. Now, you saw, some advisors come out through DHS and saying, hey, Russia's exploring going after the United States, going after, specific targets. And we did see increased activity from Russia when it came to, port scanning and looking for quick wins or high ways to impact things very fast and quick. But it was nothing that was like, hey, these are planned methodical attacks where we have, Russia's already got a massive foothold in a number of our different infrastructure, components around critical infrastructure, financial, et cetera, where we had this mass imminent threat. We didn't have that. And all the narratives on the news were Russia's going to attack everything. And I got calls from customers, big companies that are like, hey, we're shutting down our company right now, or we're doing this, we're putting in these drastic measures to try to stop and protect ourselves against these attacks against Russia. And I'm thinking, well, listen, nothing that you're probably going to do in the next 24 hours to a week is going to have that drastic of an impact from a likelihood perspective if you haven't been doing security for a long time. So I would focus on the basics and protecting yourself and getting good detection capabilities in versus, hey, we're going to implement a 700 character password with 17 factor authentication across our infrastructure to try to protect ourselves against these attacks. So there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions that were happening based on the narrative that was being pumped here. And again, we really still haven't seen a massive offensive happen. Now, Putin's come out and said, hey, after we deal with this Ukraine situation, we're going to retaliate in some way, shape, or form against, the people that put us into this position, obviously being the United States, Western allies, et cetera. So, I wouldn't say that we're out of the woods by any stretch. That's not the case. And we should still, be looking for these specific types of attacks. But again, they're going to be more sustained longer term than what we traditionally would think of: quick hit, massive outages, things of that effect. And so why didn't we see any of these, and why were they largely ineffective? Well, one of the interesting parts about why we didn't see the large effectiveness around Ukraine is that Ukraine is used to being hacked. They've been hacked by the GRU for years. You look at 2015, 2016, you look at NotPetya. I mean, they've had continuous attacks against Russia over time. So they've hardened their systems over time, which has been great. They're not perfect by any stretch, but they've definitely tried to increase their capabilities to withstand specific barrages of attacks. Now, it doesn't mean they're perfect. I know a lot of their communications were taken down from the ability to communicate, operate in many ways. Starlink was a major savior in that case, and they're using that predominantly for all of their military command and control. So new technology being implemented that Russia's having a tough time shutting down. So there's been some movement on that, but largely ineffective as a whole from what we've seen. So let's take a look at Russia in general. Now, when you talk about Russia, there's a lot of different units. What's interesting is that Russia doesn't have one specific group that's directly in charge of cyber. They have essentially three main ones, and they all kind of compete with one another, and they've all been linked to a lot of different areas that's out there. When you hear most of the, major attacks, is typically coming from the SVR and GRU. And the GRU is a military extension. There's two primary units, Unit 26165 and Unit 74455, that are predominantly their cyber units. There's a PSYOPs one, more for psychological operations. They were very heavy in the disinformation campaigns and things of that effect. But really, the GRU is kind of an extension of the military side of the house, very similar to what we would consider like Cyber Command. A little bit different because Cyber Command is both offense and defense. GRU is predominantly offense, whereas the FSB is primarily focused on domestic security. SVR is kind of the equivalent to our NSA in many cases, where long-term intelligence gathering, foreign intelligence gathering, try to maintain footholds, try to maintain a long period of time. SVR was the one that was behind the massive SolarWinds attack that we saw a few years ago. That was obviously devastating supply chain attack that had implications in Microsoft, Cisco, VMware, Intel, et cetera, that was a major deal. So a lot of the crazy long-term attacks that we traditionally see and attribute to the Equation Group on the NSA side, we see very similarly to Cozy Bear, the SVR side, on the Russian side. GRU, mostly, again, very good, very methodical. We primarily see them. They were involved in the election interference in 2016. A number of other implications too for various areas. So again, they are very interesting in nature to see which groups would have an impact or a role in going after Ukraine or going after the United States during an actual conflict as we start to see this. Now, I want to dive into the GRU side because when we're talking cyber warfare is really the focus here, and the GRU would be the primary extension of the group that would focus on targeting, organizations. So, the GRU was involved in NotPetya. So if you're familiar with the, massive attack that caused, outages and over $1 billion of damage, FedEx, a number of other companies, basically targeted the Ukrainian tax software. And from there, they were able to push out an update that then anybody that had the tax software installed, it would basically do privilege escalation, grab the credentials, try to spread via lateral movement, all automated, and then from there start to encrypt and then cause massive outages. Again, $1 billion of damage specifically for that attack. They were involved in the Ukrainian critical infrastructure attack with Black Energy and Killdisk. They were, very impactful for that, causing outages from that side. They were involved in the French election processes. So, the GRU, the GRU is very much involved in warfare type capabilities, quick hit items, the ability to go in and attack and cause destruction the ability to launch offensive attacks in conjunction with cyber warfare. Whereas you look at the SVR, and they're more, again, NSA centric in the sense that they're going more after long-term capabilities, intelligence gathering, trying to understand what other organizations are doing, grabbing source code, understanding how it works. So very different motives. When we look at it from a direct cyber warfare perspective, you really wouldn't see the SVR going on offense in many cases, unless they had specific objectives based off of maybe in conjunction with the military side on the GRU. So again, very structured, uniquely to be able to handle different capabilities from what we see out there. So that's why I want to get into cyber warfare. Is that if we see cyber warfare happen from a GRU perspective, again, if you look at NotPetya, well planned, they had to attack the Ukraine, the third-party Ukrainian tax software company. They had to get access to. They had to understand the update process. They had to understand how to push updates out there. They had to write malware that was destructive in nature. They wanted to cause issues, and so that process took a long period of time to go after those specific types of organizations and companies with the sheer intent of causing damage. Same thing for critical infrastructure, targeting French elections. Large campaigns, specific objectives take a lot of time and effort to plan for, to prepare for, to execute, and then from there, to cause issues when it comes to it. So that's why cyber warfare is interesting. So we look at cyber warfare. This is a general statement because cyber warfare applies to anything that we're doing in hacking. Hacking is hard. It's not easy. It's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. There would be no market for ransomware, ransomware as a service, because everybody could code amazing, C2 infrastructure with ransomware components for payments. It takes time. It takes a lot of maturing. You look at Conti, for example, how they've matured over the years. You look at DarkSide, how that group has matured over the years. All of these different groups, start off and then eventually build up on their capabilities. But hacking is hard. Hacking takes time. Reconnaissance, the ability to find initial access, the ability to do privilege escalation, the ability to gain access to specific systems, and from there leapfrog to other systems and get access to your objectives. All of these things take time and effort for you to actually go and do. And so when you look at this from a cyber warfare perspective, you have to say, okay, if it takes time and effort to do, unless we have a long period of time of planning, which a lot of the reports from the Ukrainian incursion is that this decision to invade Ukraine was really done in a vacuum. You probably didn't have a lot of time to plan and execute, and it really can't be rushed. So, you have all of those different things really making up cyber warfare. And then on top of that, the industry is getting better. And what I mean by that is, actually there was just right before I hopped on to do this presentation, someone did a tweet for me saying, I remember when Hacking Dave would come into my organization and we were at such a low maturity rate that day one, he would basically break into everything and then he'd have access to everything. And then the next 4 days, he was just coding, Magic Unicorn or the social engineer toolkit or doing whatever he wanted to, because at that point he'd already written the report and it was all over with. Those days of hacking are not necessarily over. There are some organizations obviously that are at a very low maturity rate, but those days of hacking, getting access to that predominantly are over. And it's a lot harder to break into companies and organizations. We don't have as many exploits that are readily available, especially with the predominance of purchasing them. You don't have, with EDRs and everything else out there from a visibility perspective, organizations are taking more time and effort to lock things down, moving to cloud-centric devices where you have to focus very heavily on their infrastructure side of the house and how, middleware tier things work. A lot of complexity in technology, a lot of security in technology means that we've gotten a lot better, I think, in many ways. So the hack of one day doesn't happen all that often anymore. It takes a lot of time and effort to get into an organization, especially an organization that has adopted security into the principles of the foundation of their organization. Those things continue to get better over time. So again, I think when we look at this and say, hacking is hard, it's not easy. Sometimes it's easy. Let's be honest. We've had those customers where you're or organizations that you go into and it's just yeah, we're done. I had one, this is a funny story. This is a long time ago. It was a previous company I was working for, and I was writing a tool called Automator. It was an internal tool only, and it was to automate a lot of the manual tasks that we had to do, especially on internal pen tests, look for weak SQL accounts, look for NetBIOS shares, try null sessions and extracting user accounts, enumeration of subnet masks, and being able to look at where their server infrastructures are. Like, just automated a lot of our manual tasks that we had to do during a penetration test. And one of the guys at the time was like, "Listen, Dave, please don't hack this one. Just give me an hour head start, just because I know you're going to break in the first hour or two, and just chill and relax." And I remember I was like, "No problem. I'll just code my automated tool for a bit." And I had forgotten that there was so I was testing things out, and I had coded this additional step where it would automatically, once it found a specific account that it could use, it would check to see if it had administrable access and report back. And I remember running the tool internally just to kind of test it out to make sure it was working, do any bugs. And the other guy was starting to hack, and I think I was in there for about 6 minutes. And they had a blank SA account, SQL administrator account, on a domain controller. So I was able to spawn the XP command shell, and I had domain admin rights within 6 minutes of me plugging in, which made this individual super mad. So, again, those days vary differently, but most of the time hacking is hard. And most of the time hacking takes time. And most of the time hacking can't be rushed. And so, you look at what happened with Russia, we saw this, retaliation language. We started to see scans happening to start to rush things, but we really haven't seen much of an impact. And again, I'm not saying that's not going to happen. I'm not saying that we're not going to be attacked. I'm not saying that we're going to have some big companies that are hacked. I'm saying that it takes time for that to happen, and we can absolutely prevent it with good defensive measures. I want to hit on ransomware because it plays a huge role in all of this. You look at what happened with Conti, and just to throw out the Conti thing here, the Conti, and this is from Conti themselves. This is February 25th. The Conti team is officially announcing a full support of the Russian government. If anybody will decide to organize a cyber attack or any war activities against Russia, we are going to use all of our possible resources to strike back at critical infrastructure of the enemy. And recently, we just saw March of 21st, 2022, that ransomware was hit with our third largest supply chain and logistics company, where it shut down their operations to where they couldn't import or export specific things. And obviously, our supply chain is already jacked up in general. And so you hit that to where we can't even do import and exports of things. It starts to back things out even more. So why I bring up ransomware is that, ransomware in these countries are often used as a mechanism for chaos and issues that happen there. And I'm not saying that they're working on behalf of the government. I mean, there hasn't been direct statements from the US government saying they have this information. But if you look at how they're able to operate with impunity, and you see, discussions like this, obviously there are things that are happening to where these groups can operate, be very profitable. I mean, I think Conti's up in the $160 million range or $190 million range, last I heard from the FBI. And so that's a lot of money that they've gotten over the past several years. From obviously they've rebranded a few times for different times in different groups. But what's interesting to see with the Conti leaks is that, they have everything from, research and development. They're purchasing third-party applications to test their software against it. They have help desks. I thought it was friggin' hilarious that one of their hackers couldn't get out of VI and was like basically saying like this thing is the spawn of Satan, which I fully agree with. Nano is definitely better than VI in every way, shape, or form, and there is no discussion there at all. So sorry for everybody that's still using the legacy VI side of the house, and probably Perl at the same time. But anyways, what happened with the Conti leaks I thought was really interesting, and obviously I'm just joking for you folks. Not about Perl, like seriously, like not about Perl, but VI Nano, you're fine. But with the Conti leaks, what I thought was really interesting is we got to see a good glimpse of how these organizations operate and really how methodical they were. Now, I wouldn't say that they're extremely sophisticated. They're using the same type of techniques that we would use from a penetration testing perspective, but they are launching attacks against organizations in the United States, causing havoc. And I think these groups are more structured from a cyber warfare perspective to inflict more damage than what you would typically see from like a GRU perspective. So I think you'll see more damage happening and more elevation occurring from these different groups. Just recently, Conti restructured their software since it was leaked. So now they're back in action again, going after organizations. But again, I think one of our biggest areas that we're going to see from an elevation perspective is more ransomware, less on the massive cyber warfare that we saw from, or that we thought was going to happen from the GRU or SVR. And so I wanted to show an actual slide of a hacker from the SVR hacking. You got to have the black hoodie and gloves. I love these pictures because, like, who really wears gloves? Like, is it because you don't want to get your fingerprints on the keyboard that is your own computer? Anyways, I just wanted to show a picture of a hacker in a black hoodie. So why cyber war failed in Ukraine and so far and everything else. Again, I kind of hit on this, but when you look at the time and effort it takes to go after a country, to go after critical infrastructure, to go after financial sectors, to go after supply chain and logistics, to go after XYZ. What's interesting with Conti is, and most ransomware groups, is that they predominantly target manufacturing. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, manufacturing traditionally has horrible security. Now, I think that's changing because manufacturing is one of the largest hit, but it also has implications because manufacturing, if you shut down production of actually making the product, it has probably the largest monumental impact in your company and organization versus another type of company. So if you can't make a specific widget or a specific piece of equipment, and you start to get backward, and you're probably already experiencing supply chain issues of actually getting the material costs are high. If all of these different things that are happening, we go into these types of investigations all the time where, it's absolutely crippling this company or a company inside and out because they're actually shutting down production. So when you look at manufacturing, they're some of the weakest, and they're some of the most impacted based off of what we see from various different ransomware groups. I thought this was also interesting. The Russian spy chief, so the main person in charge of the GRU, was put under house arrest because of the intelligence failures of everything else. So again, we see Russia's frustration on this, and they haven't had a lot of impact, especially on the cyber warfare side and the intelligence gathering and offensive capability side to shut down communications and everything else. I don't think they anticipated Starlink. I don't think they anticipated a lot of the other things out there, but it'll be interesting to see. So, again, I go back into some of the planning and execution side of the house. Ukraine's been under attack for a number of years. They're far from impervious to attacks, but they, not to say that they're perfect in any way, shape, or form, but they have the ability to withstand some of these traditional basic attacks. And again, Starlink was a huge game changer for them, and I don't think it's something that was anticipated by Russia from a command and control perspective or operations. When you look at SVR versus GRU, the SVR is more longer sustained intelligence gathering, GRU more weaponization and offensive capabilities. I don't see the SVR really pulling or launching more offensive type of attacks because they don't want to burn all their sources. Now, that could happen. And when you hear in a lot of cases, like President Biden said, if we see a cyber warfare attack, we have a number of offensive capabilities in the cyber realm at our disposal as well. And a lot of times he's discussing capabilities of the NSA, where we have entrenched footholds into certain parts of Russia's infrastructure. I would assume, not saying that by knowing. And those types of footholds are great intelligence sources for us to get some information out of the country. And so if we launch offensive capabilities against those and we burn those sources, we start to lose those intelligence footholds, as would SVR as they start to go into those. So unless the SVR is planning on burning their already established intelligence sources, I don't see there being this massive, again, type of attack against us, that's going to cause a cataclysmic outage or foothold into our infrastructure or anything else that's out there. So some of the things we need to think about, though, we need to prepare. Attacks are coming. There's no question. The sophistication levels, I think, will vary. Again, if we go to the long-term sustained type of approach and they look more methodical down the road, we'll see the solar winds types of attacks. We'll see the not Petya types of attacks. But again, those take some time to actually go about. And you start to look at what Russia's been doing with a lot of their previous TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures. They've been focusing very heavily on cloud, going after that as a main mechanism. And we have generally a lack of visibility into that. So, I think that's an important piece for us, is that it's not just our on-prem infrastructure, it's also our cloud infrastructure that's also vulnerable in many cases. I do want to do a quick recap on Lapsus because, this turned out to be a couple teenagers out of the UK, but they hacked into Microsoft Bing source code. They had access to T-Mobile. They had access to Okta. Allegedly, third party on that one, but still had access to customer accounts. Samsung, LG, and a whole bunch more. If a bunch of 16, 17-year-old kids can impact these large organizations, what I thought was really interesting about them that I obviously didn't like to see, but I like to see how they were hacking because the techniques they were using were pretty interesting. They focus very heavily on cloud-centric applications. instead of going after like traditional on-premise infrastructure. Now, LG is very different. They dump their domain controllers and usernames and password hashes and everything else. You look at Okta, you look at everything else. It was all through portals and going through our middleware tiers and going through our cloud services, which we don't traditionally see from a lot of these ransomware groups that are out there, which is where we see a lot of the noise coming from. So I think from a security perspective, two of the biggest things that concern me, one being supply chain attacks, so getting access through a third party that's trusted, pushing out source code, and then from there having access to multiple customers, as we saw with Kaseya on that ransomware side, and then obviously our cloud infrastructure, which typically has a lot of lack of visibility. So I'm extremely concerned about security in those two areas right now. And as these groups, again, develop more and more sophistication levels, the shift to those different types of realms. So what can we do? Again, none of this is going to be groundbreaking, but shore up your ability for monitoring detection immediately. What's normal, what's not normal. Look at unusual behavior. Do you use PsExec in your environment? No? Okay, and anytime PsExec is ever used, it should be oh hell, there's something in our environment alarm. Segmentation, I can't emphasize enough. The ability to reduce ports and protocols and the ability for authentication, especially on lower level protocols like SMB and RPC, invaluable in many cases. So especially workstation communication. Like, why do we still have workstation communication and networks from a lateral movement perspective? Shut that down. If you have users still running as administrators, I mean, start there, I guess. You have a lot of work to do to catch up on, and you have a lot of attack surface to go through. Geez. Continuously test your defensive capabilities. You're running offensive testing. So, understanding your offense by building a really good defense and understanding your defense by running a good offense. Being able to do those types of simulations or purple teaming, things that could really help out in many cases. Get cloud visibility somehow. That's most important, I think, right now is trying to understand, hey, what is our cloud infrastructure? How does it have access to our environment, and how can that be used to piggyback or attack specific things? So again, visibility, looking for things in our environment that we can do. Common high yield areas where we see from a detection perspective, PowerShell is still massively used, living off the land binaries and scripts, macros, PsExec usage is used by most ransomware groups out there. Any type of WMIC usage, especially Russia, loves to use WMIC quite a bit. LSAS methods for extracting credentials, whether that's through VSS admin, process injection, etc. Ways of getting credentials, lateral movement on lower level protocols like SMB and RPC, any type of like workstation communications that you traditionally see out there, I think are important. And then use of any type of reconnaissance tools for understanding who they are. Who am I? Net commands, ipconfig, running commands in general through command.exe. Again, all quick hit items that you can baseline in your environment and say, hey, if we see any usage of this, if that's normal, okay, cool, put an exception in for that. And then look for deviations and patterns of behavior as things go along. I think those are all key things that can kind of start to make things a little bit better. But wrapping things up, again, I think that the big takeaway here is that you're not going to see this massive cyber war between all of these different countries where it's this cataclysmic outage of everything that's going on. I think the capabilities are there from a warfare perspective to shut down command and control, signals intelligence, all of these different areas, and that's what countries do. But from a cyber warfare perspective, this is still a very much evolving and mature area. I mean, cyber command is still relatively new to be a direct extension of both offensive and defensive capabilities in our military side of the house. So it's still going to kind of pan out, but we still really have not seen this massive impact that cyber has had from a warfare perspective. I think for most organizations and companies, your real risk is really predominantly still on ransomware, the ransomware side of the house, not from an imminent attack against Russia. I'm not going to say that other countries and their motives and demographics don't have an impact in your field, especially around peers. If it's medical research, intellectual property, things like that can always be devastating if you're doing work for DoD contracting or have ties to that. Those are always areas of opportunity. So again, I'm not saying that every industry vertical is the same, but manufacturing predominantly going to be ransomware. Most organizations predominantly going to be ransomware as your greatest threat and probability. And we can do a lot of things to shore that up, to identify as it happens, make it stronger, and hopefully protect against it. But that's it for me. I really appreciate everybody at Way West Hacking Fest. Hopefully you're having a great time there. I'm so jealous of everybody that's there today. And again, thanks again for everybody there for putting this on and for having me and for listening to me rant about cyber warfare. That's something that I think is really fascinating, interesting. And again, my heart goes out to all the Ukrainian people that are experiencing warfare right now, the women, children, men that are all over there. Very saddened with everything that's happening over there. And I hope it ends soon and the people of Ukraine prevail in many cases, or in all cases. But thank you all very much for your time today, and have a good one.